This is my 1997 Land Rover Defender, and it is my favorite car that I've ever owned. I've recently posted a few updates with my new Ford GT, and people keep asking me, do you still own your other cars, your AMG station wagon and your Defender? And the answer is yes. So now I'm going to post updates on them, and this week it's the Defender's turn. Today I'm going to tell you why I paid $63,000 for a Land Rover Defender, even though you can buy them in Europe for like 10 grand. And I'm going to explain why Defenders are so much more expensive here in the United States. First up, a little background. Now, I bought my Defender about 2 years ago, and I paid $63,000 for it, and at the time it had about 64,000 miles. Now, almost immediately when I revealed it, I started getting messages from British people, "Oh my gosh, you've paid too much for your Land Rover Defender," or from Australians, "Crikey mate, that's way too much money for a Defender." To this day, when I post pictures of this truck on Instagram, I still get comments and messages from people who tell me I'm a complete idiot for paying so much money for a Defender, even though it's been almost 2 years since I bought it. But actually, I got a pretty good deal. In the 2 years since I bought my Defender, prices for North American Specification Defender models like mine have absolutely shot up, like they have for most collectible vehicles. Bring a Trailer, the auction website, has become a good place to buy and sell NAS Defender models, as they're called, and let's take a look at some recent results. Here's a 1994 model that sold for $75,000 with about the same miles as mine, and my 97 has some benefits over a 94 version. A 95 hardtop model with twice as many miles as mine sold for $71,500, and the open roof ones like mine always bring a premium. And a 1997 soft top like mine with twice the miles sold for $79,000. Now, like I said, I paid $63,000 for my truck about 2 years ago, and I think the value is already up about 20% in the 2 years since I bought it. But that doesn't answer the big question, which is, why are Defenders so much more expensive here in the United States than they are overseas? Just a quick check on AutoTrader in the UK reveals here's a 2000 model with 125,000 miles for just 9,000 pounds, which is like $12,000. Here's a 1996 for only 10,000 pounds, which is like $13,000, high miles, but still. Here's a low mile 1999, 60,000 miles for only 11,000 pounds, which is just $14,000. They're just dramatically cheaper in the UK and mainland Europe and Australia and basically everywhere else compared to North America. So why are Defenders so much more expensive in the United States? This is a topic that comes up every time an NAS Defender like mine sells for big money. And so today I'm going to explain exactly what makes these North American Specification Defenders worth more than Defenders everywhere else. Okay, the number one reason that North American Spec Defenders sell for more than foreign ones is scarcity. Land Rover only officially imported the Defender in 4 model years. The first model year was 93, and they brought the Defender 110 to North America. They only sold 535 Defender 110s here between the US and Canada. These are the most sought after North American Spec Defenders. They can easily bring $100,000 to $150,000 in great shape, and they are highly collectible. Now, the next 3 model years, 94, 95, and 97, Land Rover brought the Defender 90, the short wheelbase one, the one I have, the 2-door, and you can generally get it as a soft top or as a hard top. Now, in those 3 years, Land Rover only brought 6,500 Defenders to North America, and we all have a little plaque on the back with a little serial number showing where our Defender fell in the production range, which is really cool. The serial numbers kind of vary based on model year and the type of Defender you got, but nonetheless, it's an easy way to tell apart a North American Spec Defender. Now, interesting tidbit about the NAS Defender, Land Rover actually had more of these to sell here. However, beginning in 98, the US government required that all cars have dual front airbags. Land Rover had made some very late 97 models for the US market that they then couldn't sell here because of the new regulation. So they're like, what do we do with these things? and they sent them to Japan. So there are actually a few dozen North American spec Land Rover Defenders running around Japan, and those can be fully imported now to the United States. They have all the correct US EPA, Department of Transportation crash safety labels, and they can come over no problem. But Land Rover couldn't sell them here originally because they didn't want to install airbags in the Defender, and they got them built too late, and they didn't ship them to the United States in time to conform with the regulation. Land Rover must have been a hell of a company back in the 1990s. Anyway, all this to say that Land Rover built only about 7,000 North American spec Defenders, plus maybe a few hundred that are in Japan, and the scarcity makes them highly sought after. Even if the US spec Defender was identical to the ones in Europe and Australia, just the fact that it was sold here in such limited numbers, in my opinion, would make the US spec Defender more valuable. A good example of this is the Ferrari F40. The F40 that was sold in North America was very different from the F40 that was sold in Europe. And a good argument could be made that the European one was better. It was lighter, it didn't have the little stupid front lip on the front like the US models did, but collectors in North America pay a huge premium for the US spec cars. Right now that premium is running like 20%, 1.2, 1.3 million versus around 1 million for a European model. It seems the simple truth with collectible vehicles is that generally speaking, people want to own cars that were sold new into the market in which they live, and they're willing to pay a premium for it. And so the scarcity of US spec Defenders is one major reason why they're so much more valuable. Next up, the second most important reason why the NAS Defenders are worth more than foreign ones is right here, my license plate, and specifically my California license plate. All right, generally, here's the deal. A vehicle cannot be imported into the United States unless it is 25 years old, which means the newest Defender that you can import to the US right now is from 1993, about to be 1994. For years, this alone was a major reason why the NAS Defenders were worth more money, simply because they were newer and you could only import Defenders from the 70s and 80s. But now that the North American spec Defenders are starting to get to be about 25 years old, that's no longer a big advantage of the NAS Defenders like mine, except in California. California is a wild card because it has its own EPA. It's called CARB, the California Air Resources Board. And CARB has determined that there's no rolling 25-year cutoff for vehicles. Instead, there is an overall cutoff in the mid-1970s. You can't import any vehicle newer than that into California, even if it would pass California emissions. The only way it can be done is if you take it to CARB and have the thing completely certified that it passes all sorts of California emissions rules, and only then can you import it. This annoys me to no end because it means that gray market foreign vehicles that used the same exact engine as US spec vehicles can't be imported into California unless you go through a long and expensive process to get it cleared with the California Air Resources Board. Now, this is a big deal in the Defender world because it means that basically no Defenders can be legally imported into California, even if they're diesel, which has some interesting exemptions with California, but it doesn't work with imports. Anyway, the point of all this is that the only way you can really have a Defender here in California is if it's an NAS truck like mine. And California is a big deal because California has about 40 million people. That's roughly 12% of the US population that lives in California. And obviously a lot of people in California have a lot of money, and so they're interested in trucks like the Defender. And the weather is really good here, so people can actually use and enjoy trucks like the Defender. And so there's a lot of interest and desire for Defenders here in California. And so as long as that rule is in place that you can't really import a foreign Defender into California legally, the NAS trucks will always have a lot more value. Now, just to illustrate how important the distinction is between an NAS Defender and a foreign market Defender for registering in California, I have heard stories of NAS Defenders that got smashed up, destroyed, rolled over, whatever, and people sold just the title, the VIN plate on the windshield, and the decal under the hood that said it conforms to US regulations for up to $20,000. People sell those things to people who are going to rip them out and stick them on another Defender just to fool the California DMV into thinking that it's an original NAS Defender, and so registration should be a breeze. It's crazy. But truthfully, California aside, the registerability of an NAS Defender is a big benefit over a foreign market one. Even if you don't have to conform to California's rules, registering a foreign market Defender at a US DMV is kind of a challenge. I don't want to be there when you show up with a Portugal title and say to the DMV clerk, oh yeah, oh, this is legit. No, trust me. It's just a lot easier to show up with a VIN and a truck that was originally sold in North America, and that has a dollar value anywhere in the United States. Now, those two things are the two most important reasons why NAS Defenders are worth more than foreign ones, but neither of those are the most important reasons why I decided to go with an NAS Defender over a foreign one. Instead, it has a lot to do with the next few reasons, starting with condition. So when you think about it, the Defender in foreign markets is basically a farm implement. I mean, people buy them in the UK and use them on farms to transport goods and take stuff to their sheep and drive around when it's wet in their wellies and all this stuff. And so by the time a Defender becomes 25 years old and thus is legally able to be imported to the United States, it's been used as a farm implement in the UK and Scotland, Ireland, in Australia for 25 years. Whereas the North American spec Defenders were always pitched as sort of a cooler alternative to the Jeep Wrangler, and they were always kind of used as second or third cars. Park it at your vacation house, use it on the beach. And so all North American spec Defenders are in far better condition than the vast majority of foreign imported Defenders. I have you on this angle because if you look a little lower, you can see my frame. No rust, no rotting, no corrosion. It's in really nice shape, even though this truck is 21 years old. Usually by the time a foreign Defender can be imported to the United States, it's in really rough shape, rotting, awful, because in the UK and in other countries where the Defender was sold new, it was generally used as a work truck and not like a fun summer play vehicle that you preserved and didn't put too many miles on. Next up, another major reason why I chose to get a North American spec Defender over an imported one, you're looking at it. One of the things I've started to realize is that countries are very nationalistic when it comes to their four-wheel drive vehicles. In America, the Jeep Wrangler is by far the most popular. In Japan, it's the Nissan Patrol, it's the Toyota Land Cruiser. And in Britain, it's the Defender, and in other Commonwealth countries like Australia. And that means that most Defenders are right-hand drive. And I gotta tell you something, right-hand drive is unbelievably annoying when you're in a left-hand drive country. Truthfully, the orientation of the steering wheel turns the truck from something that you can use every day, and I do daily drive my Defender, into sort of a toy because it's so unsafe and difficult to use. People have told me, oh, I get used to right-hand drive. Well, I've had 2 imported right-hand drive vehicles from Japan, and I never got used to it, and I never really liked driving a right-hand drive car in the United States. Now, left-hand drive is considered to be such a benefit in the Defender world that even imported trucks that are left-hand drive, trucks that came from Spain or Italy, Portugal, places like that, even those trucks command a huge premium over right-hand drive examples that come from the UK. The simple truth is that most Americans just don't want to put up with right-hand drive and shifting with your left hand. Next up, another major benefit of the North American spec Defender model. You look in the middle here and this thing has an automatic. Now, this may be sacrilege to foreigners in Australia and Europe who had no idea there ever even was an automatic Defender, and they're incredibly rare. Here in North America, it was only sold as an automatic in the '97 model year. The other 3 years were all manual. And in foreign countries, the Defender was manual only for almost its entire production run, all the way up to 2014. There were very small numbers of automatics built. If you got a Defender, you were basically getting a manual. But if you get a 1997 North American spec version, you get an automatic. And as a result of that, the 1997 models, like the one I have, tend to be more valuable than Defenders even from the other North American spec model years, simply because people want the automatic. Now, you might be thinking, well, aren't manual sports cars becoming more popular? Why is it the opposite for the Defender? Well, yeah, manual sports cars are becoming more popular, but this thing ain't exactly a Carrera GT. You don't exactly throw it around corners. And so if you want to actually use the Defender, and like I said, I drive mine every day, having the automatic just makes it a little bit more usable than a manual, especially if you're going to be sitting in traffic. And going along with the transmission, we have the engine. Now, basically every Defender sold overseas used a diesel, and for a long period of time, they used these tiny little 4-cylinder diesels with barely any power, but the goal wasn't excitement. This was ultimately a farm vehicle. You'd use it for pulling up stumps or whatever, and a diesel was great. And that's why a manual transmission is better in foreign markets. If you wanted to get any power out of the thing, you'd have to gear down a couple of gears in order to go. But the US spec Defender models all used a V8. It was a 3.9 liter V8 in the early ones, and later they changed it to a 4.0 V8, which was also 3.9 liters. Now, this V8 only made about 184 horsepower back when it was new, which doesn't sound like much by modern standards, and frankly, it isn't. But it was a lot more than Jeep was making with their 6-cylinder Wrangler back then, and it let Defender owners kind of brag, oh, I've got a V8 compared to your 4-cylinder or 6-cylinder Wrangler, or your Daihatsu Rocky, or Kia Sportage, or all the other little convertible SUVs on the market at the time. This was the top dog. There were basically no V8 gas-powered Defender models sold in other countries, and so the engine, even though it's not tremendously powerful by modern standards, is another reason why the NAS Defenders are worth a little more. It's just a little bit more powerful and a little faster, and the V8 works a lot better with the automatic transmission. Now, next up, yet another reason why the NAS Defenders like mine are more valuable than foreign ones has to do with these bars in place right here, these crossbars. This is an external roll cage, which is a pretty big deal. The Defender is aluminum, and if you've ever seen photos or video of one rolled over, it ain't pretty. So needless to say, these bars being in place is a good thing. The 1993 Defender 110s sold in North America had a full cage going over the entire vehicle, called it the Safari cage, and it was painted to match the trucks. They were all white. The Defender 90s, like mine, just had it over the windshield and the front part of the car, but either way, it's better than nothing. Now, I've heard two competing theories as to why Land Rover put these in. One is the fact that the government made them, that the car simply wasn't safe enough to be sold in North America without some sort of additional rollover protection. Another theory is that Land Rover just thought it looked cool, and so they threw them on these trucks. I'm not sure which one is true, but I like to believe that it adds a little safety, because I do worry about driving this thing with no airbags, no anti-lock brakes, and a relatively old school design. These external roll cages were made by a company called Safety Devices. I think they still make them, but they're incredibly expensive if you want to add one to a foreign Defender. I think it's like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. All the US Defenders came with them standard. Two other big reasons why the NAS Defenders are more valuable than foreign ones have to do with equipment, starting with the soft top. Mine is an open-air, soft-top, fun beach cruiser vehicle. Now, like I mentioned, in most foreign countries, the Defender was sold as like a utilitarian truck, and so they generally didn't have removable roofs. They were mostly sold as hardtops or as pickup trucks. Now, the main benefit here, of course, is that if you live in a sunny climate, as I do, you can just pull off the top and enjoy the day. But in almost every foreign market Defender, in order to remove the top, you have to physically remove it. It's aluminum. You have to pull out rivets or cut it off, and it isn't quite the same as having an actual soft top truck like mine. The other big piece of equipment that this truck had that foreign market trucks didn't is air conditioning. At the time, Land Rover was only installing heat in these in practically every other market. The United States market, though, got air conditioning. It's this big unit right by your knees below the dashboard. It uses its own set of vents, since they couldn't route the air conditioning through the existing heat vents, and this truck has air conditioning. Now, obviously, I never use it. This is an open top truck. I drive it here in San Diego. It never gets all that hot. But if you had a hard top version, as many of the US spec trucks were, and you lived in a hotter climate, you might want that air conditioning. It would come in handy, and most imported trucks won't have it. And so those are the many reasons why the North American Specification Land Rover Defender is worth far more than its foreign counterparts. Now, I should mention there are a lot of shops that build foreign Defenders to an incredible level that goes well beyond where the North American Spec Defenders are. My friend Jacques has a shop in Charleston, South Carolina called Relic Imports, and he just builds up these incredible Defenders that are way cooler than my truck, way more capable, and they sell for way more money, and they're worth it. But in general, now you know why the North American Specification Land Rover Defender is worth a lot more than foreign Defender models, and maybe you'll start to think that I'm not such an idiot after all for paying so much money for a crappy old Land Rover.